Thank you. Thank you. So, good day, everybody. My name is Herbert Wilkerson. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I am a licensed professional counselor in the state of Alabama. I also work in the higher education world with Seneca here at University of Alabama at Birmingham. A little bit about myself. I've been in the mental health field for nearly 20 years with the undergrad in social work, a master's in counseling, and currently pursuing a PhD in public health. And so what we're going to talk about today with the relationship between burnout and self-care. As somebody who has done social work and mental health therapy for a long time, and also working with students in higher education, this is something that I'm definitely connected to, and this is an important conversation we need to have. So let me start the slideshow. So by the end of this session, you will be able to identify when to seek outside help versus handling on your own. We'll talk about the 5 stages of burnout, the impacts of burnout on your well-being, what self-care means to you, ways to add self-care to your daily routine, and the importance of having good boundaries. All right, so feel free to unmute yourself and just answer this question. Has anybody felt like this, and what does that feel like? You're sitting in the kitchen, everything's on fire, you have a coffee cup, and you're just telling yourself this is fine. So I would like to hear, like, what is that like for you all?
I mean, it's just you've got 1,003 things going on, and you're just kind of knowing that your place is on fire, but you still just need to get things done. And you're like, well, it'll go away eventually. We still got to get stuff done. So you just deal with it.
Yeah. Anybody else? All right. Now, this is a cartoon that makes into, a few of my presentations. And, everything's going crazy and we're just telling ourselves this is fine. And what happens is that we get into these experiences and we get accustomed to living this way. It becomes normalized. And so the question becomes, do you need a fire extinguisher or do you need the fire department? And when you think about the fire extinguisher, it's something that you can do for yourself. When you think about the fire department, that's when you need outside help. And so when you think about being able to determine which is which, you got to look at, sometimes how levels of stress become normalized. You think about the cartoon strip and the dog sitting in the kitchen, chaos happening all around, and the dog is just kind of, visually disconnected and telling himself this is fine. What happens is that we get into these environments and it becomes normal, but the reality of it is that it's not normal, regardless of what we tell ourselves or how many times we've done it. It can have an impact on us. Just because it feels normal doesn't mean it's normal. Paying attention to your body and how it responds to stress, I think, is very important. I would love to hear from the group, like, when you are experiencing stress, what are some things how does your body respond to it? What do you notice happening to you?
Headache.
Headache. All right, what else? Anybody?
Muscle spasms.
Muscle spasms. All right, what else? Things that, studies show and people have told me, headaches and muscle spasms, definitely, sweaty palms, increased heart rate, like you're having a panic attack or a heart attack. It also says here impacts on sleeping. It's something to think about. You sleeping more, you sleeping less, are you having restless nights, having trouble falling asleep, having trouble staying asleep, have a hard time waking up in the morning. Your changes in mood. Are you becoming easily agitated in situations that, really shouldn't be taken to that level? Do you find yourself depressed at times or just having extreme moments of sadness or even being apathetic? Big one is, does your relationship to food change? When we experience high levels of stress or very stressful situations, it can impact our relationship to food, to where you eat more, eat less, eat inconsistently, the types of food you eat, what have you. And so, it's important to think about that. And then also, do you think about hurting yourself? Sometimes it's not, you're suicidal, but you could have thoughts of, what if I just wasn't here? It'll just be easier if I was gone, things like that. And so when you're thinking about these responses to stress, the question is like, do I need somebody else, or can I do it on my own? The reality of it is like, we often try to do too much on our own, and we need to seek outside help. And there's a lot of reasons as to why people may be hesitant to seek outside help. It could be stigma that you may have. It could be religious reasons. It could be, fear, judgment, and things of that nature. But being able to, seek outside help can help you navigate, some of these things that you're dealing with that are connected to stress and can lead to burnout. And so this next slide is really important when it comes to burnout, because it takes burnout and puts into these stages. All right. And so I think as educators, we're all in this honeymoon phase right now. I see my friends who are decorating their classrooms. The academic year is about to start for us. And all the joy and the love and the reason why you got in the profession in the first place is like rampant. And in the process of doing so, our commitment and energy and creativity is at an all-time high. And but sometimes we tend to overcommit in the beginning. We set unrealistic expectations. We expect, somehow for these students to be a different group than the last students we had. And then what happens is actually after you become overcommitted, you get into this balancing act. You start to think about like, this isn't as smooth as I thought it was. You start to get aware of like, how you're managing stress, and you start to feel the impact of being overcommitted. Now, side note, in the whole burnout process, this is the easiest point to exit. Because as we know, as people who have lived as adults, the further you get into something, the harder it is to step away from it. And so when you start to get into that balancing act and you agreed to be on one too many committees, then it's like, hey, I need to step off this. And so, but we tend not to. And so we keep going into the stages of burnout. And so then we start to experience chronic symptoms, marked by chronic exhaustion, physical illness, anger, depression. We're in it and it's impacting us in a negative way. But we're still getting up day to day going through it. It just, the version of us that people get may not be the best. And then we get into that crisis mode. We get so deep into it. We're pessimistic about everything. We are numb in our behaviors. We start to have an escapist mentality. All these things tend to happen as we get into this crisis mode. And from there, we get to this point where one day you want to get up out the bed and you can't seem to wake up. And you just check out. And so it's important to understand this about the stages of burnout, because the things that we're passionate about, the things we care about can burn us out too. And sometimes, we've experienced these things before. We may even be here now. But again, like the picture of the dog in the first slide, it becomes normalized. All right. And so I'll open it up right now. Like, any thoughts on the stages of burnout and maybe, some of your own experiences with that? I know I can share my own experiences, like being a social worker early in my career, when I was doing in-home family work and in-home family counseling. It was definitely easy to, as a young professional, to get overcommitted and feel like I can manage it all and not do enough to take care of myself on the other end. And it was all good until something out of the ordinary would happen. It was all good until, something happened personally, outside of work, and it impacted, me overall. It was all good until I had some car trouble. Then it's like one of these things like unexpected happens, and now everything's in chaos. And so understanding the stages of burnout and where you may be on those stages of burnout is important. And so, what does burnout do to you? And so we got to think about, the physical and emotional exhaustion that comes along with it. Feeling cynical about work, lack of focus or motivation. All right. And so I would ask the group, do y'all see anything on this list that may stand out to you or have something you want to add?
Something I experienced with this past year was lack of focus or motivation. I guess that kind of stems into depression as well. You just kind of lay around. I didn't want to work out. I didn't want to see family. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I was just kind of there, So I definitely have felt a couple of things on here.
Yeah. And it's absolutely normal to feel those things when you're experiencing burnout. I think sometimes we tend to feel as if we're supposed to be superheroes in this thing and not feel these things. And if we do, then something's wrong with us. But if you're experiencing burnout, but yet and still you're telling yourself everything is fine, then at some point we're not being honest with ourselves. I think, and that's just a therapist in me, like we have to really be honest about what's happening inside. Because if we're not, it's going to continue to happen, and it's going to get to a point where it affects other parts of our lives in ways we can't control. And so you think about physical symptoms like headaches, muscle tension, we talked about that, anxiety, depression, substance misuse, alcohol or drugs, trouble sleeping, all the things we've already touched on. And here's just a word cloud that comes along with burnout. Right? These are just some words that people associate with burnout. Like one is pressure. When you're in situations, you're in high pressure roles, and you got it coming from different directions. As educators, you're thinking about the person you're educating directly. You think about their families, participation or lack thereof, and you think about who you report to and all the organizational needs that have to be met and all the pressure that's put on you as the educator. And all these things, lead to burnout. Somebody, put hormones, and you think about, ways that it impacts you internally that is, a lot of times gets associated back to stress levels. We'll go to the doctor for stomach issues and things of that nature. And after all the medication, you still got the stomach issue. And then sometimes that just point back to stress. And so it's important for us to recognize that, and we got to be able to attend to that. And so, as we think about, self-care, and self-care is really popular right now. You think about the term self-care, and, once it caught wind on social media, everybody's self-caring. And I mean, that's a good thing, but also we have to really be, conscious of like what self-care means. I think, in some ways we're kind of like restricted to like we're doing something for ourselves that requires money or a trip or whatever. And it can be more than that, definitely. So the World Health Organization defines self-care as the ability of individuals, families, communities to promote health, prevent disease, maintain health, and cope with illness and disability with or without the support of a healthcare provider. So when you look at that definition, that's way more than going to the barbershop or working out or going to get a massage. Not that those things aren't self-care, but at the same time, we can do those things and not really be addressing needs that we may have. And so you think about, how we promote health in our families and in our own lives, in our community. What are we doing to position ourselves to prevent disease, to maintain good health? How are we coping with life? How are we coping with disabilities? How are we coping with disease that we may have? Like there's this term called like creating a prescriptive environment, instead of prescribed medication, like how can we make a prescriptive environment? And what does that look like? How are we spending time outside and connecting with nature? How are we connecting with our families? How are we connecting to people important to us? What are we doing for fulfillment? How do we see the world outside of ourselves? How are we serving our community? Like, what are we doing from a prescriptive environment standpoint? Because if we only rely on therapy, medication, or something like that, those are great. I'm a therapist. However, a therapy session is 1 hour every how many hours? So what's the rest of that time consist of? And so one of the terms that I've been using over the last few years, especially in regards to my own journey and taking care of myself, is intentional. Like, I'm just really big on being intentional in what I do. So I'm a person that likes to work out. So I go 5-6 days a week, but sometimes my presence in the gym is more about my mental health well-being as much as my physical health. And I may have a lot going on. So my intention when I go in there is like to really allow myself to think through what's going on while I'm working out. So I can maybe sweat out what I can't say. Maybe sweat out what I'm not crying about, what have you. And so we think about, what self-care looks like. Of course, it's exercising regularly, eating healthy foods, fostering and maintaining healthy relationships, getting good quality sleep, seeking professional help when needed, and following treatment plans. And that number 6 is important. I do this presentation a lot with churches and whatnot and older people. And I talk about following treatment plans as a form of self-care. I remember my grandfather when he was older and taking medicine, and he hated to take medicine. So in his mind, he can take all his pills for the day at one time and then go outside and work all day. I'm like, you're gonna overdose. Like you gotta you gotta follow plans accordingly. Like, and it's difficult because it takes effort, like to take care of yourself. It takes effort to make food choices, good food choices. It takes effort to drink more water than soda. It takes effort to get up and go to the gym 2 days a week, for people. I mean, or go out hiking or walking or something like that. It takes effort to talk to people and, be vulnerable and let people support you versus you always being the one supporting everybody else. It takes effort. And so when it comes to like being intentional about self-care, you have to be intentional and committed about the process of taking care of yourself. And so this is just a checklist that, I found that I thought was pretty neat. Wake up with the sun or a minute earlier than usual, 15 minutes earlier than usual. Set your alarm, be consistent with getting up. There are going to be some days you can allow yourself to sleep in, but be consistent. Get up, reflect, think about the day. Set timers, organize yourself, unplug from technology. And that's, like I think about like sleep quality. How many of us lay in the bed with the phone in our hands? Like that's like, if I look at TikTok at any time of the day, it's in the bed when I'm going to sleep, and I'm filled with conspiracy theories and stuff like that on my TikTok feed somehow, or like videos of professional wrestling in the 80s. And it's like, I'm watching them one after the other, and I look up and it's 45 minutes to an hour done passed by. And it's like, so, how we, using our phones. And when it comes to social media, like it says, unfollow negative people on social media. Like I unfollow a lot of things. I hide stuff. I check the little box where I don't want to see this again, because there's so much out there that will cause us to like question who we are, question what we're doing, especially during like political season, so much rhetoric. And so, I think it's important that we protect ourselves. On here it says take a bath. I would, add to that. And this is a podcast I heard once, and it talked about being present and being in the moment, and that being a version of self-care. And like so many things we do that we could, make the most of, but we've become accustomed to just like letting it fly by. So the example was like taking a shower. We'll take a shower before we go to work in the morning and think about everything that's going to happen when you get to work. The staff meeting you're about to have, how you about to tell such and such off, what you're not about to do, all these different things in the shower. And it's like, the guy was like, now, when that happens, get out the shower, get back in the shower, and just take a shower. Like we get so ahead of ourselves and we have a hard time with just being where we are. And so, but that's the society we live in. We are accustomed to a fast-paced, keep pushing society. People were left with results and productivity. And that's, what people just tend to look at. And in the process of doing so, we are negating ourselves in the process. And so from there, this is important, and I have this conversation a lot with people that I work with, is boundaries. And so we think about boundaries, think about personal boundaries are the limits and rules we set for ourselves within relationships. A person with healthy boundaries can say no. No is a complete sentence. But they're also comfortable opening themselves up to intimacy and close relationships. One of my favorite quotes is that having good boundaries gives you the ability to love yourself and them simultaneously. If I'm not having good boundaries, then I'm likely going to have some resentment. I'm likely going to have some burnout. I'm going to say yes way more than I need to. And when I do so, I'm saying no to myself a lot. When I don't have good boundaries, people are going to guilt you into doing the things they want you to do. And not really be concerned about what you need. And so having good boundaries could be creating distance between you and somebody else. And connecting to people who are more likely to be reciprocal in the relationship versus like you doing all the heavy lifting. And that can be family, that can be coworkers, that could be, partners or whatever, like whatever boundaries needs to look like so you can prioritize yourself and meet your own needs is important. And as educators, it's like we're conditioned to, to be servants, and being servants can mean, we're more prone to not have good boundaries. And we're more prone to feel the need to say yes. And, we've said enough yeses, it's okay to say no sometimes. And when you think about stages of burnout and stuff like that, how many times do we get into the stages of burnout to the point where we just can't seem to function? And how many times have we said yes to stuff we didn't need to say yes to, and how that just pushed us on those stages of burnout? And so, so we have to really, be mindful of that. And so it's just some of the benefits of setting boundaries. Believe it or not, you get respect from others when you set boundaries. And sometimes you got to remind people of the boundaries once you set them. You just don't set them once and people just fall in line, especially when they're used to you doing things a certain way. It can improve relationships because there's more clarity. It improves your emotional health because you're not carrying the burden of poor boundaries that can lead to all sorts of internal issues. And it can help ward off burnout. So that is our presentation, but I'm also one who loves dialogue and to be able to talk about things. So if you have any questions or comments on anything that I shared, or just have, in general, I'd love to be able to answer.